All right, so why is this useful? Most important question. Well, imagine that you are doing an innovation project together with external partners, or that you don't have the skill in-house to make it happen, at least not 100%. Or you engage in a bigger development project, a software project, and you know you're not going to be the only one involved. So how do you arrange for the contracting so you can create an environment where all these parties have 100% focus on making your dream come alive? So if you're in such a situation, here's where I think I can give you some useful advice. And I will tell you a little bit about what Agile contracting is, but I will share by the end of the presentation 2 case studies where they've actually been used in pretty big projects. So I hope that will inspire you to try something different, right? Okay, so why is this important and why now? Okay, one driver is digitalization of work. I mean, we have globalization, we have the technology trends, we have consumer behavior shifts, right? That forces us to think differently. And this, if I will just talk from a Scandinavian perspective, this is currently having a huge impact on the public sector. So if I would pick a random public sector department in Sweden and I ask them what's on your top 3 agenda, you will find digitalization of our services as one of the points up there. Another driver is efficiency and learning how to do things which are useful. I can pull out many different data points, but the fact is, as Goiko showed very effectively this morning, that a lot of the things that we put so much hard earth sweat into, just doesn't make it. Either it does not make it at all, as go into the waste bin, or no one cares about. So of course we want to change that. So now, finding out and doing good things seems like an easy thing, right? But it's not. And I'll give you one example. This is from my town where I live, Stockholm. And we just built this brand new hospital. It took 4 or 5 years. We have currently paid 500 million euros doing it. And the bill is still ticking. The problem is, it's shiny. It gets robots that transfers drugs between departments. It has state-of-the-art telecommunication systems. It's just one tiny little catch. And guess what that might be? It doesn't work. You can't run healthcare inside this hospital. And it sounds silly. I stand in front of you, 2018, and tell you we cannot build hospitals. But sorry, that is the fact. But why, right? And if you compare this, I will give you an example of another hospital that was built in a different way, and that was actually procured using Agile contracting by the end of the presentation, which can serve as a counterbalance to this example. So this is an ongoing big pain in my country right now. Here's another hospital, right? Same amount of places for treating patients, built in Germany. It cost an eighth of the sum of Nya Karolinska, and it worked from day one. Just what did they do differently? What on earth did they do differently? Well, what they did differently was simply to ask themselves, before they put the shovel into the ground, what are we going to use this hospital for? And they deferred starting building the hospital until they really clearly defined this. That is the difference. All right, okay, so yeah, our hospital costs twice the amount of Burj Khalifa. I mean, it's just sick. So these things, doing big projects is hard, it's tricky. And this is just samples from our country, right? So we pour millions after millions into a waste bin, And for my country, with 18.5 million people, It's simple. We cannot proceed doing this. We cannot spend our time and energy and our precious resources, human as money, in doing this, because competition will wipe us off the chart. So this is a serious matter. This is not something I just say it's a good fairy tale. This is crucial for us to survive in a globalization. Because we can't pour 100 million new Chinese developers on things that doesn't work, because we don't have them. Right, so what goes sour then? If I would make a sort of comedy picture of a traditional procurement process, it could look like this, right? You start out with a visionary goal. It's going to be the best hospital ever. You write down a set of requirements because you want to procure someone who takes on this challenge. Now, when you write down these requirements, of course, it is so that the people that you ask to write down the requirements realize that this is such an important project that this train will leave the station. So I will write down all the requirements I can think of and some more, just to make sure I get my stuff in. Right? So this balloons, right? And then we ask for a good skilled provider, and we procure the ones that either tick the most boxes, the most features, or the one that has the lowest cost. And we get going. It looks good, right, in the beginning, but then the provider realizes, hey, I don't have a margin on this. I never really had. So what I will do is I will swap out key people inside my project, and I will pick on some more projects and multitask just to make ends meet. Because I really knew when I went into this that it's not paying back. And you get stress, error, and pain, and a lot of negative side effects. So what goes wrong here? Well, we need to ask ourselves, what behaviors are we really promoting? Think about that for a moment. What behaviors exist for the provider to stay focused and put attention to the effect goal of the customer? And what behaviors, what incentives exist for the customer to be open-minded about their internal performance and how they need to collaborate with the provider to make sure you reach the desired goal? So basically, we are producing a situation where the incentives are going in completely different direction from day one. Right, but we can do better, and that's what I'm here to share with you. Now, the really weird thing is, if you pick your random project and you ask who is responsible for the end usability, the end customer experience, I challenge you on this to find a clear definition who has this responsibility. It's very rare that this is written out. So basically, it's fun to build things. Now, when you look for data and you basically ask the people that are running this procurement process today about the things that they are doing, they spend the most of the time with, and you compare it with the stuff that they say we should be spending time on this, you realize there's a big gap. So on your left-hand side, you see all the stuff that the lawyers, procurement people, sometimes even business people spend most of their time on. This is what they engage their time on. If you look at the other side, you'll see what they would like to spend their time on. Now, you can see that this diverges, right? But the good news is Agile contracting focuses on the right-hand side of this. So the challenge here is when you start off, you realize you don't know everything about what's going to be needed. Okay, you know some things. That is true, and that should be clarified, but you don't know everything. So how do you write a contract that deals with not only what you know today, but what you are going to figure out in half year's time? How do you create such a contract? So let's walk through the key building blocks that actually creates an agile contract. And there are three components that makes this up. You can choose to use one of them. You don't need to use a full agile contract. But realize that the effect of each component is you multiply the effects, basically. So you will get the wow feeling once you do all three. Right? And there are three parts here. The first part, describe your effect goal. This is back to the question, why are we doing this? Right? What's important? Right? What behavior change are we going to produce? Why is this world is going to be better when we're done? And you spend some time agreeing on this. The next thing that you do is you focus the procurement on finding skill, the biggest skill, instead of finding and looking for the lowest cost. Because that is one of the key risk factors when you go into such a project, that you don't have the skill necessary to deal with the challenges that are coming ahead. So you make sure you do this. And finally, you create a contract which emphasizes both, or actually even writes down into the contract the process in which you are going to work, maybe even defines the roles that are necessary from each party, and also includes a pricing model with a shared incentive to succeed in time. So let's look inside this a little bit more depth. So when we ask to build something, we can ask the question on many different layers. I mentioned that the most important component in Agile contract is the effect goal, right? But underneath here, we can actually describe needs. These are basically problems, the type of problems the different target groups have today. And we make sure we clarify this, and they go into the contract. What we don't do is define the solution. We do not define the solution at this point, because our thinking is that the smart people and the process and the economical governance that we have in place will make sure that these figure out the right solution that fits our problem. So we've put our focus on these parts. And just to give an example, I touched on this before, what healthcare to run, that was defined, I think it was just 2 months before the hospital was complete, right? So let's give this an example. I will give you 4 requirements, and I want you to tell me what I need, right? It has to have 4 wheels, front lights, steering wheel, not a wheel, but a steering wheel, and it has to fit 2 people, right? If I will just give you a bunch of money and ask you to build it, what would you build? A car, right? Any more ideas? Okay, car. Good suggestion. Yeah, I want a car. I was really after a Lego car. So then let's rephrase this as needs instead. Should be fun to play with for a kid. Should be able to create vehicles based on it, characters. And as a parent, I want to be able to walk barefoot at night. Okay, now you realize you probably will not suggest a Lego kit, right? You will do something like Play-Doh or something that works in another scenario, given this. The next component is choosing provider based on skills. And there are a couple of things that go underneath the hood here. The most important part, I already told you, is about when you are comparing the different suggestions and deals and offers you get, you are comparing them with an emphasis on skill and quality, right, over cost and price. It does not mean that price is not important. No, it is not so, but it's saying that the other components should be more emphasized, right, because they have a higher correlation to the end cost by the end of the project. Now, there are different techniques which you can do this, And one very common technique inside Agile contracting is to use something called code camps. And the benefits, at least if I would share the experience from Sweden, is basically, I'll tell you that the really skilled providers, I mean for medium-sized companies and even small, they never even try to give in offers for the public sector. Why? Because the process is so heavy and so slow, they don't even bother. So how can we change this? Well, what if I told you that I would love the key skilled providers to show up on our doorstep, and I will give each provider one day where I would say, bring your team. The condition is the team you bring, you have to promise is going to be inside the product when we're done. Bring a team, you get one day, we will take one of our needs that we think is roughly applicable, and we will give you one day to prove your skill. During this day, we will compare and check that we can get a good collaboration, because it's both ways between a customer and provider. We will check the result delivered, and we will look at the quality. But during one day, you will know, basically, right, if this is something for you, and we will know if you is something for us, if I would take on the customer hat. And this is commonly used inside Agile contract as a simpler way to find out and find a good chemistry. Because you have to realize, from a provider perspective, the risk buffer that you put into a project has a high correlation to your trust with the customer. So if you believe that the customer will have a good collaboration, that they can make decisions, probably the risk margin that you will propose will be smaller. So this is for both ways. If you don't like code camps, you can do a proof of concept that takes a week or something like that, or even something that takes 2 months. But just beware that you are dealing with people that have very limited time. So be precious about the time that they spend inside this. And the final component here is collaboration towards the effect goal. And a very common or one example of a shared incentive is this very simple idea. If you deliver towards the effect goal before the budget is done, basically before you run out of time, the remainder of this budget is then split. And 80% goes back to the customer saying, hey, you can do whatever you want with this 80%. If you want to continue doing something else with us, that's fine. If you want to do something else, that's fine. And 20% goes back to the provider as a kickback for their skill in helping us find a smarter way to realize our effect goal. Right? That's an upside from both parties to actually complete the effect goal before the time runs out. Certainly there are other incentive schemes. I'm just showing you one. They can have bonuses, know-how, exchanges, etc. But the important part is that there has to be some shared incentive, right, inside for both parties. If you look at the construction of an Agile contract, you will see that there are 3 main modules. The first module is the needs statement. Here's where the effect goal goes and the needs. The second defines the process. Here we actually are being really explicit about how we're going to work together. Things like we're going to have a sprint, they're going to be 3 weeks long, we're going to have these milestones roughly every 2 months. These are the roles required from both parties, both the customer and the provider, and a couple of more questions. Final is the risk model, right, with shared risk and shared upside. So these 3 things makes up an Agile contract once it's finally written down. And if I would look at examples of big projects and just look at the number of pages that exist beneath the contract, I can tell you that the Agile contracts are generally a lot thinner. Right? I will give you an example soon of a hospital which was a €100 million project that was procured using 18 papers. So it's pretty thin. It also makes it easy to overlook, easier to review. So you might ask then, okay, how do we deal with risk? And there are a couple of ways, a mechanism that are built in to deal with risks. The first is transparency from both sides, right? You can't get away with working in a black box, basically. But also inside the under contract, there is a typical clause that tells you that the people inside the project have a mandate to act. This means if they see something that is fishy, they are mandated to talk and raise this up so we can deal with it instead of hiding it, right? A continuous follow-up towards the effect goal. So an Agile project using Agile contracting would continuously, once a month, look at the progress towards the effect goal. I mentioned governing the process and choosing provider based on skill and incentive to succeed in time. So what these things do is try to look at what variables affect the final project and what correlates with them being successful, and make sure we deal with those variables explicitly. So, examples, right? Well, have people tried this? And the good news is, yes. Being on the hospital track, I need to then pull out another example. And this is Karlstad Hospital. It's an area in Sweden. I mentioned the sum, 100 million euros. The interesting thing with this hospital is that to today's date, this hospital has saved 30 million euros to the municipality that built it. It worked from day one. It's actually already operational 1 month before the projected starting day. They projected they're going to build 10 surgical rooms inside this hospital, and they found out during the project that they only needed 7. They prototyped every single important room inside this hospital. For example, the surgical rooms. They were built using scaled 1-to-1 prototypes with plywood, and they put in all the surgical equipment, they pulled in the doctors, and they asked them, try out the surgery. And they found out, of course, that some things that they thought was going to work didn't. So they redrew the drawings inside the hospital based on this experience. They actually even prototyped the toilets. Now, being smart people, you are immediately asking yourself, in 2015, don't you know how to build toilets? Like, a couple of thousand years of architectural involvement, don't you know this? Well, ask yourself, how well does an architect know the needs inside a hospital? And you might see that there is a gap. For example, how do you deal with a doctor coming in with gloves that comes out for surgery? How does he pull the handles of the cranes? How does a person who is disabled, how do that person move around inside a toilet? And you realize there might be some important clues here that we should figure out before we get the final toilet built. So they did prototyping very extensively throughout this project. They also did some odd things. And one of these odd things was, okay, they asked the, well, maybe not odd, but they asked all the entrepreneurs, and we are talking the people that build houses. They had to commit to have open economical books, meaning you can look at the expenses throughout this product. So that was transparent. They also made it so that for a contractor to engage in the project, the CEO of that company had to sign a letter of allegiance towards his or her staff. What this meant, in this letter of allegiance, there is an important clause where they said, I commit to the fact that my staff that contributes inside this project will be more allegiant towards the project than my company. Why is this important? This is weird, and I know even in Sweden we debate, can you really do this? Right? Is this possible? Yeah, they did it. But why did they do it? Ask yourself this. They did it because they put a lot of trust into the lap of the people that came from different construction companies, and they wanted to make sure that they did the best choices to make sure this hospital was built, not to improve their own end result for their own company. So when they did material choices, what material should go into the hospital, they should not think about their own gain, but also always think about the hospital first. And it was to get some confidence from the people that your CEO said that this is okay. So they took this letter from each CEO and they put it out in the dining hall when everyone went, so that everyone that took part in this project realized, I'm doing the right choices. And I have the trust and the courage to do that. So one example, and if you want to read more about it, you can go to the website called agilecontracts.se. So if you want to read it, read the story. But it's an English translation exists as well, so you can actually read the English version. Here's another example. All right, let's move to IT. This is a Danish project. It's a 30 million euro project that happened during the course of 3 years. And the challenge they had was they had old infrastructure, old legacy that basically would not survive, and they needed to renew this. So what they managed to do, and they procured this using Agile contracting, is not only deliver 29 out of 29 projects during this time frame on time, and 27 out of the 29 on budget, but they also made sure that this stuff worked. So when it came out, they actually got better business performance. Right? They had more satisfied people that worked on the business side of the organization. Now, how did they do this? What were the most important clues? Well, I mentioned one clue being the Agile contracting, which they used to procure the partners that helped them make this happen. But inside this, they mentioned typically the fact that they were co-located. So there was a requirement for the partner development teams to actually work inside this agency. They also made sure that they sliced down the big project into smaller chunks. They also made sure that there were business users that was active parts inside this project. And that made this a constraint, right? That we do want them to be a part. So think of this when you have agile teams, that actually you are not just developing, right? You're trying to do that together with a business person that has a problem that you want to have solved. And you want to show this close collaboration between the two. A final reason is that they did retrospectives and they had a professional facilitator to make sure that these retrospectives were not superficial, okay, just take care of the shiny small problems, but actually dealt with the tough stuff, the difficult things that they needed to sort out. So that's it. If you want to learn more about the stories, here's a couple of links. What I hope that you do is that you give this a try on your own, learn from it, and if you do that, please let me know so we can share the stories. All right. Thank you.